Hello everybody, my name's Herbert, and I'm a hedgehog. Dinky-doo, dinky-die. I live with my mother and father in Sedgelock. That's a hedgehog town.
Herbert the Hedgehog. Autumn Day. Autumn had arrived and Herbert and his mum and dad were snuggled up in their little cottage. It was unusually cold and the Spike family were preparing themselves for their long winter sleep. Mr. Spike looked worried.
We need to get some more leaves to keep us warm, he said to Herbert's mum. But the wind is too strong and I'm finding it difficult to collect them.
What are we going to do? Asked Mrs. Spike. Herbert thought to himself.
I know,
he called out.
I'll get my friends to come and help.
Before his mum and dad could speak, Herbert was on his bike, cycling down the lane as fast as his little legs could pedal. First he came to Martha Mouse's house.
Martha,
he shouted out.
Please will you come and help us collect some leaves so we will be warm over the winter? Let's go and see if Charlie Owl would like to help,
Herbert said to Martha as she was getting her bicycle from the shed. She was followed by all of her family. Herbert didn't count them, but he was sure there were a few more little ones. Soon they were at Charlie Owl's tree house, and Herbert asked him if he would help. Charlie flew down over the pair of them eagerly. "Of course," he hooted. "Of course." Soon Herbert had collected all of his friends, Bobby Squirrel, Freddy Frog, Oswald the outrageous otter, Felicity Fox, Dakira the deer, and even Bastian Badger, who usually slept in the daytime and played his lovely reggae music all night. Soon they all arrived at Herbert's little cottage. Mr. and Mrs. Spike, hearing all the singing and laughter, appeared at the door.
"Goodness me!" exclaimed Herbert's dad. "What a sight!"
And it was truly a sight. All the woodland folk working and singing together, gathering up the leaves in any way they could. Martha Mouse only managed to collect one leaf at a time, but she was often distracted as she had to tend to some of her little ones who were misbehaving. Charlie Owl tried to swoop in and grab bunches of leaves, but the wind was getting stronger, and even with his strong wings he couldn't hold on to them. Bastian Badger was just too slow and tired to be bothered anymore and decided to take a break and listen to some music on his player. Dakira the deer was overseeing them, giving instructions. But the wind grew stronger and stronger and they just weren't getting anywhere. Mr. and Mrs. Spike had now joined in as they felt sorry for all these folk who were trying to help. "It's useless," declared Bobby Squirrel, as a big bunch of leaves he had just collected was snatched by a tremendous gust of wind. Mr. Spike called to the animals to come into the cottage, as it was now getting too dangerous for them to be outside. They all agreed and made their way indoors, all except one, that is. Herbert was far too busy to notice that the wind was getting stronger or to hear his father's concerned voice. The woodland folk were all in the cottage now, huddled in front of the fire. Mr. Spike put the kettle on, and Mrs. Spike bought some of her delicious homemade cakes for them all to share. There were so many woodland folk gathered together that they didn't even notice that Herbert wasn't there. Poor Herbert. Herbert had managed to gather some leaves and roll them up the hill. A bit like making a snowman, he thought to himself. He struggled to the top of the hill where the wind was even stronger. Herbert was exhausted, proudly clutching the small bunch of leaves he had gathered. Herbert heard a roar as another huge gust of wind rushed up the hill, picking up all the leaves he had collected and throwing them spectacularly into the air.
"Oh, blow,"
Herbert said disappointedly. and then chuckled to himself as he realised what he had said. Then, without warning, an even bigger gust of wind swept Herbert himself into the air.
Whoa!
He shouted.
I'm flying!
Herbert went up and up and up into the sky. Then eventually he stopped going up. As he began to fall, he looked down, and like any clever hedgehog, he did what came naturally to him. He curled up into a tight little ball. He landed with a thud at the top of the hill and bounced a couple of times. Then he began to roll down the hill. Down and down he rolled. Finally, he came to a stop. He stretched out and opened his eyes. Everything was still going round and round. He tried to stand up and fell back down. He tried to stand up again, but fell back down again. Finally, he got to his feet, still feeling very giddy.
Hi, diddly-di, I'm learning how to fly. Hi, diddly-dee, I'm feeling quite giddy.
He looked around and couldn't see any of the woodland folk, but he could hear voices coming from his cottage. He opened the front door, and Mr. and Mrs. Spike and all of his friends turned around to look at him. Their jaws dropped at the sight, and they were speechless.
Well done, Herbert, Mr. Spike exclaimed proudly. You are such a clever hedgehog.
Yes, agreed Kira the deer. I can't think why I didn't think of that. You're a genius, remarked Felicity Fox, who loved a cunning plan. Herbert was now looking decidedly confused. He really didn't know what they were talking about. Mrs. Spike spotted the look on Herbert's face. He was clearly embarrassed. Herbert, come and look in the mirror. Herbert strolled over to the mirror, still totally confused as to why all of his friends thought him so clever. He looked at the mirror, and what he saw took his breath away. A broad grin spread the width of his little face as he realised what he had done. In the mirror, he saw a huge ball of thousands of leaves wearing a pair of glasses. When Herbert had rolled down the hill, his spikes had picked up all the leaves. Mrs. Spike began to pick them off him. She neatly arranged them into warm, cosy beds, ready for the family to sleep in over the cold winter months. The wind had dropped now, but the night was drawing in, and it was getting even colder. The woodland folk bid their farewells, still admiring their little friend.